Welcome, everyone. My name is Karam Mckey, and I lead IIE's Student Emergency Initiatives and our portfolio of mission-aligned scholarship and fellowship programs supported by foundations and corporations. We're really excited to welcome you to our second peer forum. Since 2017, and thanks to the support of the Catalyst Foundation for Universal Education, IIE's Platform for Education in Emergencies Response, PEER, has worked to connect displaced and refugee students to higher education while raising awareness on global higher education in emergencies. By convening beneficiaries, leaders, and experts in the field, through this event, we aim to increase understanding, exchange best practices, and encourage collaboration globally. PEER is the anchor of our student emergency work. It is a clearinghouse and a resource for refugee and displaced students to connect with educational opportunities. It is a launching point for both IIE and others in this space who want to reach and support this population. IIE has done this in collaboration with many of you through our scholarships for Syrian students, through our refugee scholarships for students in Chicago through the Julia Stash Fund, and our latest programs with edX and University of the People to support master's level study opportunities. When you registered, we also asked if you'd be interested in sharing your contact information with others who registered for the forum. And we'll be distributing that list at the close of the forum so that you may get in touch with one another, since we are not able to have formal networking on Zoom in the same way we would if we were in person. So now, I am very pleased to introduce Allan Goodman, IIE's President and CEO, who will share some remarks and then welcome our opening panelists. Over to you, Allan.
Mary, thank you very much, and thank you and Precor for the great work in organizing this. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to all who are joining from wherever you are. We're convening today in the midst of what is for IIE its 12th pandemic. We started in the middle of the Spanish influenza in 1919. And during and after each pandemic, international education has played a constant role in looking after the needs of refugee and displaced university students. But I think what's different this time is the scale and the scope of the challenge we're facing. Never have so many refugee and displaced students been disconnected from education, especially higher education, really in history. And never have we had such a large and almost permanent refugee population. If it were a country, refugee and displaced people would constitute the 20th largest country in the world. They would be larger than Italy, France, and Germany, and the UK. And so we're focused on a group that is maybe larger today than ever before that we've had the experience of dealing with. And because of more than a decade of civil wars and now the global nature of the pandemic, we're probably also looking at something that we've never seen before, which is an entire lost generation of young people that started their university education and over the course of the past 10 years got disconnected from it. Anything we can do to help any one of those students helps the future, but the scale of the challenge is different than any we've faced before. Presciently, 5 years ago, Gordon Brown, John Sexton, and Liz Chung Gaffney approached us about the idea of creating a clearinghouse of opportunities and for refugee and displaced students to be reconnected to education. And this became the PEER platform. The idea was we all knew about scholarship opportunities and we all knew about refugees, but we didn't have a way of connecting them up so that all the scholarships got filled, and as more got created, students would have the opportunity of applying for it. It was Gordon's idea to make this a global network, started higher education. And our aim still is to hope that we can connect even students below that level to the education that they're missing. So that was 5 years ago, and thanks to the Catalyst Foundation for Universal Education, we were able to launch here. And thanks to everybody that's joining us today, we were able to constantly update here. We do it almost every day with new opportunities and also new needs. And that's something we will sustain for the future. The world needs these clearinghouses of this sort, and we hope that we can sustain here to make it that. I also think it's a little different after this pandemic and this refugee crisis for maybe all of us on the panel, because we all have some experience touching the lives of refugee and displaced students. I know when, in my own case, when a Vietnamese family came to live with us, their child and the children of their friends, the moment they left the refugee camp at Fort Indian Town Gap, the moment they left that refugee camp, 24 hours later, they were in our home, and 36 hours later, their child resumed his elementary school education. Fast forward, there was elementary school, high school, college, and a PhD in economics from the Johns Hopkins University. And maybe the paradigm I had until this crisis was that there are opportunities for refugees everywhere to be connected to education systems. We now know that's really not the case. We now know that education pathways are rare. We now know that there are not enough pathways to accommodate all the students that exist and need to be reconnected, and more that will be needing to be reconnected lest we have a lost generation. So I think maybe we're living through a period of paradigm shift for all of us. And really, none of us thought maybe our careers and work in higher education would involve so much concern, care, and innovation to try to help refugees and displaced students get connected to the education that they started. Our panelists this morning, this afternoon, and this evening are Elizabeth Keese and John Sexton. Elizabeth, if they would both unmute their mics and cameras. Elizabeth is broadcasting from Oxford. John is broadcasting from New York City. And we all maybe entered the refugee and displaced student business with different expectations. And so the paradigm is shifting. We're learning lessons as it does. And maybe I'd like to start with Elizabeth to say, how has your thinking about refugee education changed, and how is Rhodes now helping?
Thank you, Allan, and thanks so much for having me, and just congratulations to everybody, and true gratitude for the work that you are doing with the peer network. I say that from the heart as the daughter of Hungarian refugees, and having experienced this in my own life. So, the way within the Rhodes Trust, and with our flagship program, the Rhodes Scholarships, and with other programs that we run, as we have sought to expand our global reach. And so we added recently Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, Palestine as a Rhodes constituency. We also added a global constituency, which is available to students from any country in the world. And then also within our existing constituencies, Australia, the United States, Canada, we are attracting, thankfully, a growing number of refugee students, which is very, very exciting. What we've learned, though, from that is, I suppose, fundamentally, how much we have to learn about how to support these students. So just a couple of brief reflections on that. that as you get to know these students, so many of these refugee students, high achieving refugee students, are so incredibly resilient and positive and so impressive. And sometimes it takes a while to peel the onion back and to discover the deep challenges that they are facing and navigating in their lives. So supporting family members financially off of limited scholarship stipends, facing incredible kind of legal status insecurity. In some cases, if they don't already have asylum, but are actually trying to figure out what their long-term home will be. And so for us at the Rhodes Scholarship, it's been a learning journey that continues of figuring out what are the challenges and what can we do to support scholars? What are the special funds we can raise? Scholar support funding? How do we adjust the parameters of those funds as we recognize the particular like familial challenges that some of these students are facing? And then increasingly, and this is very much a work in progress, how do we become a kind of clearinghouse of information and networks for these students to figure out their future? So we're trying to figure out how do we draw immigration attorneys into our orbit to be a resource for our students to figure out how do they establish residency in a safe country. We have students, for example, who really can't go back to Syria because they'll be immediately impressed into the armed forces, can't go anywhere else. We really need to figure out a way to help them establish a home for themselves in a safe country. And so that hasn't been a part of what we typically do, our day-to-day work. So it's having to learn that and build the infrastructure to support it.
And I think for all of us, the immigration aspect of things is part of peeling the onion, but also bringing resources that we would have never envisioned we had to bring, whether we have large scholarships or it doesn't matter what the size is, the problems are still very big. John, I want to turn to you because I imagine the last thing you thought of running NYU in creating a global network university is that you were going to create University of the People as well, a global free higher education platform, which also serves refugees in such a vital way. What was the turning point for you that made you realize, in addition to an NYU, we need a University of the People?
Well, as you know, Allan, first of all, I'm simply a pawn on your chessboard. I want to start by saying what a terrific kick it is to be on the panel with Elizabeth, but also to join her in saying thank you to you and to IIE for the work you do. It's heroic. And you and I have known each other now for decades, and you've been a role model to me throughout that time. So a tip of the hat to you and to all who are involved in this wonderful work. Now, as my friend, I was put on earth to be a teacher. So this coming academic year is my 61st year of teaching at the high school, college, and law school and graduate school level. So I approach everything as a teacher. My windows into this world represent two different vantage points more than a pivot. So I'll just modify your question a bit, and I'll be uncharacteristically elliptical so that you can unpack as you wish, or we get on to more important things by listening to Elizabeth. The unifying bridge between both worlds would be a deep sense that humankind is one community, and that the greatness of creation is the diversity of forms of human experience and backgrounds there are, and a kind of ecumenical view of the world where without giving up in individual experiences, either theologically or in a more secular way, we can be one humankind if we are very sensitive to listening to each other and empowering each other. Because it doesn't mean anything to listen to someone to whom you don't give real power and inclusiveness in the conversation. So that ecumenical drive has been with me back 60 years of Jesuit education right through to today. And then a friendship with Gordon Brown, whom you mentioned, who should be really saluted, at least for bringing me into his army, because he has devoted his time after being prime minister to working with the folks who are being deprived of real educational opportunity around the world. Refugees, of course, a major segment of that group, but the numbers are staggering, hundreds of millions that really don't have any hope of going past a primary school education, and that not a good one. 60 million who will never meet a teacher for a single day in their entire lives. So start with that. I'd like to situate this conversation inside of that large number and refuse to bet against the world. We didn't meet the Sustainable Development Goals. We just postponed them by 15 years, and even they are modest. But assume we succeed in meeting those goals, that will mean multiples of college-ready students who should go to college, even if one assumes that only 40% of high school graduates should go to college. If we succeed, there'll be multiples of the present worldwide college and university population. So there's, unless we're going to assume failure at educating those, then there are going to be these cohorts coming through, and there has to be a reformulation. So NYU Abu Dhabi, thanks to the extraordinary vision and generosity of the government there, from its beginning was sent out on the assumption that talent was isomorphically distributed worldwide, but that meant that we had to go to the nooks and crannies. And by the way, I should say IIE has played a critical role in providing us with scouts literally into 200 countries around the world, finding students in the most remote places who had promise, who could be given the most advanced education in the world and fully funded at NYU Abu Dhabi. On the other hand, the University of the People is a completely different approach, which, and you'll hear much more about this from Shai Reshoff, the extraordinary visionary behind it, in the next panel. But University of the People gives a quality education and has the capacity to do it to millions because it's all open source, all online, and so forth. So they're really, they're two, NYU Abu Dhabi and the University of the People really didn't constitute a pivot in my life. It's just that, I no longer have portfolio at NYU. I still continue to be involved in teaching at NYU Abu Dhabi, but the University of the People, I see them as two instruments as part of the same symphony orchestra of education, trying to provide opportunity as much as possible. The numbers are so staggering that there's enough talent to go around. As you know, there are 125,000 college-ready Syrian refugees just in those camps in those three countries. Right. And there are many other refugees in the world.
If you had a magic wand, how would U.S. higher education, how would you want it to change to embrace this new reality of a student cohort that's unlike the kind we normally pick? And I'll ask the same question of Elizabeth. How would you like Oxford and Europe to be changing to embrace this new reality?
Two things, and I'll be brief. The first is we now have learned from this terrible pandemic of the last year that we can enhance even an Oxford or an NYU education by vehicles like this. And I know that my teaching this coming semester will be a combination, not because of the pandemic, but because I've learned I can do things that in this medium I can't otherwise. And obviously there's a democratization part of that. But the second and most important thing, and this is the lesson that comes out of both NYU Abu Dhabi and University of the People for me, we cannot simply make the goal stamping people with a degree. The political class will want to do that, and they won't be concerned about getting the students up a ladder of possibility, so that the ones that belong in the violin section are in the violin section, the ones that belong in the brass section are in the brass section, and so forth. And there's a sorting, and that's going to require massive reorientation of the way the elite universities recruit and the kinds of financial aid they refer to. I know that when somebody we found in the Masai Mara goes to NYU Abu Dhabi, but then comes to New York, giving them a full room board tuition scholarship is not enough. Elizabeth referred to this. There's food security issues, there's a subway card, there's the plane fare. Otherwise, you're giving them something that means nothing.
And Elizabeth, your perspective on having a magic wand and how you would want higher education in Europe to change.
Yes, no, and I love John's image, the metaphor of the symphony, and that there are sort of different instruments and different sections, all focused on this investment in human talent development. And so I guess, if I had a magic wand, it would be for all universities to embrace as a fundamental mission student access and success, and that, and to see themselves as part of this broader network, along with NGOs and schools and refugee serving organizations and et cetera, of talent in investing in human potential, recognizing, as John was saying, that that brilliance and talent is universally distributed. I mean, it's distributed across the globe in all kinds of nooks and crannies, but unfortunately, opportunity is not. So I would want to see a lot of experimentation for kind of new kinds of programs. I will mention just one that we're involved in, which is we recently launched RISE, which is a partnership between the Rhodes Trust and Schmidt Futures. This is Eric and Wendy Schmidt's philanthropy. It's focused on identifying high potential 15 to 17-year-olds around the world and investing in them. And we have we just are in the process of selecting our first cohort. It's a very young program, but we have started with 3 application routes: smartphone, WhatsApp, and paper-based. And the paper-based is specifically in refugee camps. The WhatsApp is there for people who don't have access to sufficient data for them to apply via a smartphone. And so that will be, it's one little piece of the symphony, but it's one I'm super excited about, because I feel like it's another place where we can intervene in the lives of some extraordinary young people, find them, bring them together, and invest in their journey. So, and as we've started to do RISE, we've realized that there are these very creative and entrepreneurial universities that are saying, I'll give a shout out, for instance, University of Chicago was one that has gotten in touch with us and said, we're not trying to recruit all the RISE kids, but we'd love to bring some of them for a summer program to open their eyes, help them make connections to universities. And I love that kind of spirit of, we're in this together, we're all in the talent investment and development business, if you will, and how can we learn from each other and work together. So that's what I would want to see, as well as, of course, actually fixing the business model of higher education so that it is affordable for everyone, if we're really talking about a major magic wand.
And I know Mary is coming on because there are both her questions and we need to conclude this very brief conversation. But I love what both of you were saying about the need to reach, the need to experiment, the need to look in not the usual places for the usual suspects. And that also has to be part of higher ed's paradigm shift. We're not a complete university if we're not drawing students from that generation and from those sectors of world society. Mary, do we have time for one question that you could moderate before we have to conclude?
Well, I leave that to Elizabeth and John. Do you have time for one question?
We do.
Yeah. Okay, so with the COVID-19 pandemic, obviously, it's disproportionately affected underserved, displaced students, individuals, communities, much more so. And so with that in mind, what do you see in this space moving forward? John, you mentioned the Sustainable Development Goals, not meeting them. I mean, COVID-19 will obviously put an even greater wrench in that. So maybe you could both share a little bit about your thoughts on that.
Elizabeth?
Sure. So yes, I mean, COVID has exacerbated every possible form of social inequity within and across societies. And so, I mean, I think some of the lessons that I'm seeing from COVID, certainly John already mentioned this, is the power of using virtual tools for education to be able to reach people when they're not able to travel, and to figure out ways where even in places with limited access to technology, you can get technology there and bring smartphones, for example, are more widely distributed than I think a lot of us, at least I realized until we started Rise, and so how can we use the technology that is available to young people in order to give them access to education. I think another lesson, and I'll be brief on this, it's a very big one, is just to really think about capacity building that will enable societies and different regions of the world not only to survive this pandemic, but to build capacity to address future pandemics. As Allan said at the start, how many pandemics and epidemics IIE has weathered. So whether it is human capacity development, building, educating people to be community health providers or vaccinators, or it's actually building capacity for manufacturing of vaccines, something that we desperately need to do in different parts of the world, because we've seen that with a global pandemic, how much nationalism comes to the fore and how much vaccine hoarding we end up seeing. So I think it's a call to action for thinking about investments in the things that will enable all the regions of the world to be better prepared for future pandemics.
So I would incorporate and join Justice Elizabeth's opinion fully and offer a slight concurring opinion as well. This comes from a different place, trying to see something really positive coming out of this. I think for all good-willed people who've been paying attention, the structural biases built into society have become much more evident. The death rates are almost a metaphor of that, through the health system, into food, into education. If we don't see it now, both nationally and globally, then we're just choosing not to see it. And to me, that should be the springboard for coming back to this notion I had before of giving. We should understand, even if we're simply utilitarians, we should understand the remarkable waste that's involved by not bringing geniuses, I mean, because just do the math and go down to the 0.1 top percent, we're leaving geniuses without education. You know, people that should be getting the most advanced degrees in the most difficult subjects that some of our privileged young people don't want to do the work to do. So that means that we should become extremely aggressive about, and this is something I learned to go back to the combination that Allan prompted me to talk about. The University of the People has been a search engine for us to allow people who have no way to take an SAT exam, no way to present a letter of recommendation, no way to present even a high school transcript, if they can prove it. They go to the University of People, Shai will talk more about this probably, and they demonstrate a capacity. And we've been taking at NYU Abu Dhabi, because we can scholarship them appropriately, students that the University of People discovers in the hills of Afghanistan, in the tumult of Haiti, et cetera, and they end up with PhDs. So let's not miss this opportunity, both to take advantage of the visibility we now have, that the talent is out there, and then devising search engines that are scouts out there, as IIE has been for us, to get the talent. And then let's get the places that have the capacity to give aid. And I applaud the RISE program, which is a version of this, but let's get the elite universities of the world to get behind using these search engines, and not just relying on a standardized test that is biased from the beginning.
I just want to express my thanks to Elizabeth, to John, to Allan for joining us, kicking this off with a really wonderful conversation. Lots for us to think about as we move into the next session and into the next couple of days. So thank you again.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you. Thanks for your ideas.